Hello and welcome to ArtShow. I'm Craig Stover, and today I have with me Mirabel Wigon. Hey, Mirabel, how are you today?
Good. How are you? Thank you so much, Craig, for having me on.
Thrilled to have you on. Wanted to start by sharing some of your work.
Awesome.
So, went online and I selected a few pieces that I thought were outstanding. And
Thank
I
you.
wanted to start this with this particular piece because when I
Hmm.
saw this one, I kept going back to it. That's like, what do I start to begin with?
Yeah.
So, I love the sort of the dynamic motion in this,
Hmm.
the levels of layering, sort of the central focus. Can you tell me
Yeah.
a little bit about this?
Yeah. Actually, it was one of my most recent solo shows in Sacramento. I'm in California. So, yeah, this was like a piece I had in that show, Hollow Veil. And, I was thinking a lot for this particular exhibition about like the ecological effects happening in this region, right? And specifically where I'm living in the Central Valley, we had like these massive storms that like impacted the small town that I live in. So I would take my dog for this walk, and then I'd see like this kind of like regional park was like totally decimated. Like these giant oak trees, like the whole root system like just pulled out and was like down. Um, and I was like totally like impressed by that sort of grandeur, I was like, wow, that's pretty awesome power of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking a lot about like how we go about in these like kind of curated spaces, particularly I'm in an agricultural area. So this idea of cultivation, and then this desire to keep like even the regional parks like super tidy and clean, and then all of a sudden something really terrible happened. And then I started documenting my walks through the park and all the disaster that happened. And then yeah, basically I was kind of recording that event while simultaneously recognizing that it's kind of weird like how I understood this disaster that happened, that a lot of it's more informed by like this plethora of information that we're inundated with, and like how I was like recording it. And so how could I make a space that was sort of doing that, like instead of deep space is like coming at you, with all these different like layers of information.
Are you
So
using photographs within your work
yes,
as the source
depend
materials?
yeah, definitely like photographs, digital collage. In some of my other work I did more mapping and 3D modeling.
Okay.
um, and also I used to make maquettes like in grad school, and then I'd light them and then paint from them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are you always carrying a camera around with you?
I love my phone for that
Okay.
reason. Yeah. So I'm
Yeah. Who
always
doesn't?
like,
That's right. I
I'm always
always
like, oh
forget
my
about.
God, that leaf is amazing. I mean, you
Right.
should see my like archive. It's kind of, I mean, a lot of it, I'm not sure if it's usable, but at the same time, it's also kind of fascinating, you know?
So I wanted to show this piece because I love the dynamic motion that you
Mhm.
have going on in this. And this is a work on paper, correct?
Yes, this is a work on paper. And it's actually a little bit older. I made this piece at the tail end of grad school,
Mm-hmm.
and it was in my thesis exhibition. So my work has kind of shifted a lot, out of grad school and then moving kind of back home, quote unquote. Like I'm from Northern California, and I was
Mm-hmm.
down in Southern California when I made this work. And I was really interested in at the time, like kind of cataloging and recording how I navigate through the city, as well as like understanding like the extractivism and energy production like in the LA basin, essentially. And you might probably guess how much I'm into cubism and like American precisionism
Mm-hmm.
landscape. So
I can see that behind the
yeah.
structures. I was curious to know about
Mhm.
you do a number of works of oil on paper.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions about that. Are you is it because paper is easier to use or why on paper
You know,
with oil in particular?
it was, I know, I've been thinking about that a lot actually. So for a minute there, I was like trying to play around with like wash and watercolor, and then I realized like I can't get that same intensity that I can get with my
Do you
oil.
prepare your papers though?
I do. I
Okay.
prepare them. And then also like I do have a sketchbook, but not exactly. So I
Uh-huh.
sort of use like working on that paper in effect as a sketchbook, and then sometimes like the work that comes out, I'm like, oh, that could be like a finished piece. It's not really just a study. It's
Hmm.
like finalized. So I've been making that transition, and honestly, it's easier to store. I can like mount it later if I need to, and then it can go onto the flat file.
Ease
So
of use. I love it.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
totally with you on that. I was wondering about like, sort of archival nature of it, because oil just, it'll
Oh,
eat
it
it
just
right
totally
away.
leak. It does. And so if you look at the back of those paper, it's like starting to fall apart.
Yeah, right. But that's what they have conservators for. That's
That's
their job.
true.
Right,
That's true.
yeah. So I
Mhm.
also wanted to show this piece because I loved the shaped image that you're
Oh yeah.
using on this. And it was you have a couple of them on your site that I really like. But this one in particular, because it had both those, I guess, the elements of cubism,
Mhm.
but it also looked like those sort of torn holes, those sort of like little mouse bitten areas. So
Yeah.
no other way to describe that.
Yeah.
It just added so much to this piece.
Thank you.
How big is this one,
Oh gosh.
roughly?
Roughly it's like 40 by 40, maybe
Oh, so it's a
30.
larger piece.
Maybe it's 30 by 30. It's something in I don't know. This is where like I make paintings. My spatial, like, I'm not
Right.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, who
Um,
knows?
but
Uh,
yeah, like I had a whole thing about this particular work. There was a minute where I was like, oh, I'm gonna make shaped canvases or shaped paper pieces that look. What I really liked about this one, when people walked into the gallery and saw it, because I had it on view at a couple places, they actually were like, wow, that's dimensional. Who knew you were making dimensional work? And I'm like, no, it's not. And then we're like, oh yeah, it
right.
took me a minute to realize it's not.
What they're
Um,
talking about. Uh-huh.
and then I was like, oh, I should definitely follow that trajectory. And I'm thinking, I work sort of in a weird cyclical fashion. So I like table. This is on the table, but I think I might circle back around to it at some point.
So we
Um,
might see shaped canvases in the future.
I don't know. I've been playing with it in my mind. It's like, well, if I'm gonna make works that feel like they're popping out, why don't they actually pop out? Some it's
Right.
back around.
But the idea of implying popping out can sometimes be more effective, I think.
I think
Especially,
so too. Like, how do they? Yeah, questioning it.
so
Mhm.
this painting, I think I can't remember what the title is, but it seemed like it was an important piece.
Definitely. So I think this one in particular in grad school was like, I think that piece that you're like, oh, things are like working out. I recognize something that I'm doing, and things are coming together.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that this one's rupture. I think it
That's what
is.
it was. Hmm.
And so yeah, this is like a detail shot, but like if you see the below a certain point, there's like these geological layers. And so I was really into I don't know if you've been to Long Beach, but they're uh called Disneyland Islands. So the guy who designed it, Disneyland, made these like facade for the oil rigs that are kind of like off the coast of like the Long Beach
Hmm.
area. And I was like really fascinated by this structure that like kind of hid what was behind it, and then underneath is this whole like infrastructure that's trying to extract oil.
Hmm.
And so, but at the same time, I was thinking like, what is the model? Like, if I made like a really messed up model, what does that mean? Like, because models are supposed to be a a replica for the actual thing that's going to be built, and it's supposed to be really precise. And what if that model wasn't so precise and is actually more akin to what's happening? You know?
Hmm.
And so
I
yeah,
like this particular one because of the amount of depth in this, the layering of not just paint but of ideas. I thought
mhm.
was really it was a richness that I hadn't seen in all your work. So I had a feeling that there was something else going on here.
Oh yeah,
Um,
there's a lot of things. I think.
so speaking of richness, so this is obviously I think one of the newest pieces that you've done.
Yes, very. I
And
think.
so there's that motion, that destructive nature, but it's still nature, both creating and destructing at the
Mhm,
same time.
mhm.
Where's the references for this from?
Okay, so like I was thinking a lot about, seasons are such a an important like genre, I guess you could say, in art, right? Like
Uh,
Virgil the Elder did this, and I'm like, oh, what if I, with my move up north again and thinking about, my position in space and in this particular place that I'm living, like, oh, there's like these terrible fires, and then all of a sudden the seasons change and there's these floods, and like, where do they kind of meet in the middle? And I think like my work is just thinking about these things as they're happening. So the fires happen, and there's all this like really insane looking like phenomena in the sky. Like the skies here are really intense, especially with the fires that were happening. And then you had like these massive floods that kind of like washed away all this destruction, you know.
hmm,
And then I also superimposed. I mean, it's very abstracted. You can't really tell, but it's the landscape of this region.
hmm,
So it also leads out into the delta. So where I'm at, I'm like on the floodplain essentially. So the two major rivers converge and go out into the delta. So it's kind of like an amalgam of all
hmm.
these in this particular painting.
The color, the way you change the values is really quite nice in this
Oh,
because it
thank you.
allows for a depth of field that um, it's not a realism depth of field. It's more of like an imagined kind of thing, but
Yeah, sure.
um, it works out well in that way. It I think it forces the viewer to stay a bit longer to try to figure out what exactly is going on.
I'm
Um,
glad to hear it. That's a good thing.
so this is, and here's going way back.
Way
So,
back, yeah.
but I can still see those marks that you made in this still, you still have it. It's
Oh
within
yeah.
your uh, repertoire of mark making.
Hmm,
But
hmm.
I thought it was really interesting. But you choose to use color in a different way here, whereas I think
Yeah.
the newer works tend to be a lot more lighter.
Yes.
The at least the lights in the front, but here I see it as in the back, right? So it's
Oh yeah.
kind of a switch over. And of course, it's not nature; it's all man-made stuff. But um,
Hmm.
I got to say, this was a really fascinating image.
Oh, thank you so much.
I really like this one.
Yeah, no,
Um,
thank you. Really, like, yeah, because when I moved down to Long Beach, I was thinking a lot about like after, undergrad, right? I was making work and I was living, uh, in these kind of like, you know, I was in the city, right? Like I was living in the Bay Area, and then I moved back to Sacramento, and I was thinking a lot about like architecture and like these kind of dilapidated spaces, like the just all around the cities that I was kind of navigating. And at the time, I was driving from Sacramento. I was working for a farmer actually, and then I would go to the Bay Area in San Francisco, and I would sell my wares. And so I was thinking a lot about that. So that kind of carried through when I got into grad school. So this is like first year in grad school. I was making all this work about basically being a flaneur, sort of like I'm walking around the city and like recording it.
uh,
Uh, and
being
then
an artist.
being an artist, right? Exactly. And then there's like this internal dynamism. So this like energy that I wanted to be like underneath all of this that's kind of supporting the figures and all the activity. So
It
that was
it
the idea. Yeah.
it works really well.
Thank you.
So I want to ask you a question about speaking of your work. I want to ask you about your titles.
Oh, sure.
So I'm kind of curious. Do your titles come after the paintings are finished,
A
or
100%. They come.
100%? Okay.
Yeah. And to be honest, I don't feel like I'm the best title maker in the world, but
Well, I've noticed something that your latest works, your titles tend to be verbs,
yes.
action item. And I'm wondering, are you doing this because you want them to reflect the movement that's within your pictures, or is that a stretch?
No, no, I think so. I mean, it feels like very intuitive when I come up with them, but I do notice that too. And I also have a tendency to make like an analogy with like anything botanical. Like even in grad school, everything was like it was industrial, it was connected to the organics, biological systems out there. So there's always that corollary. And then I think in the more recent work, it's funny, painting is static, right? Like it's not actually moving. You're implying,
Right.
energy. And so yeah. So I don't know. I feel like it's like such an arduous thing. I'm like, I sit there like for days. I'm like writing out titles and like it's very.
Okay. Do you keep those lists of titles for future use?
Yeah, well, you should see my sketchbook or notebooks. It's really weird. I just like write all over the place. It's kind of terrible to decipher
You know,
my own.
I was going to ask you if you kept a
Yeah.
sketchbook, and I have a feeling like a lot of artists, I would have guessed that you kept a sketchbook. I
Mhm.
wouldn't have imagined that it's your own personal language, but that seems to happen with a lot of artists. Like it's only decipherable by you, kind of a
Yes.
thing. Would you
I
have you ever
understand
shown your
that.
sketchbooks?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I could. I mean, a couple times I show my students, I'm like, hey, like it's okay. Your sketchbook could look like anything. Like, look at
Right.
what I do. It's not like this really like meticulous looking thing. It's a hot mess. And then I
Mm.
have a bunch of stuff that's like around in sticky notes. I'm trying to be better because it's been
Good for
hard
you.
yeah, it's been hard to like look through my stuff. I'm like, I don't even know what I was saying or thinking anymore. So yeah, there's
I
that.
I, I want to know about one of the questions I love to ask
Mhm.
artists is your early childhood. Do
Okay.
you have any memories, like a first memory of being exposed to some piece of art that still sticks with you?
That's so interesting because it's weird because I can't really think from early childhood, no, but I was always drawing like
Okay.
all the time. Like I was always doodling and then I would make up these elaborate stories about my characters and the drawings and the characters and that never really stopped. Like even in like high school and whatever, I was always drawing in the margins. I never thought I'd be an artist even though I drew all the time, and I know my dad was always like, oh, here's another sketchbook, being really
Mhm.
supportive, and my mom was like, well, you got to be a scientist or something.
Right. Well, I
Yeah,
think I think I just found the title of your next show, which should be Elaborate Stories, because
elaborate, exactly.
right, because that's a lot of what goes on within your works. So catch me up. At what point did you then decide to become an artist?
It was I think it was like maybe, in high school I played with the idea because I started discovering like comic books and stuff. I was like, oh, I really like this because I always enjoyed, animations and cartoons on TV, but I didn't really think about it. I was like, you know what? I'll try to do something practical and make my mom happy. And my mind in undergrad, when I got
Uh-huh.
into undergrad, was like, well, anthropology sounds really practical. I can study cultural objects,
Hmm.
and that's a practical. The humanities in general. That's another conversation. But
Right.
uh, and then I took a painting class, and then I was like, you know what? No, I'm just gonna switch majors. It's okay.
Okay.
Being an
Was there
artist.
somebody who was there somebody who lit your fire that really
Uh,
got you going, or was it gradual?
I think it was gradual, but I had great professors in undergrad. And Grace Munakata was one of my professors, and I really loved her work, and she was really supportive. But even in college, I didn't know what I was doing. At the same time, I was like, oh, maybe I'll be an illustrator and animator, and that's like what I wanted to do for like
Mhm.
most of undergrad, which is funny because I was making paintings. So that's I don't know what I was thinking. I'm like, I'm making these paintings, but I want to be an illustrator. It seemed like the practical. Maybe I was telling myself this to convince
Right.
myself of
You never know how you're going to slide into being a painter. Um,
exactly.
I want to know a little bit more about the subject matter, the stories within your work.
Mhm.
So you did say obviously we all have cameras that goes around, but pinpointing specific subject matter is
Mhm.
different than just gathering source materials.
Sure.
How do you go about deciding that? Or how do you go about finding your subjects?
That's a great question because, like, I think that's like a journey in itself to like understand or reflect about like why I do the things that I do. And I think it goes back to like even early childhood. Like, I loved exploring like the places that I lived at. It was like all I wanted to do. Like, literally, I just wanted to like know all about where I was at. And then I wasn't allowed to, but I'd sneak away and like go to the local park or something, or I'd explore around. And I had these dreams of like, well, I went to continuation school in high school, so I didn't finish high school exactly with everyone else, but I thought I would just go hop train. I mean, I had like these really wild dreams. I was gonna
Ah,
do
youth.
stuff. Yeah, but I think that's really what it comes to, like ultimately is why I think making these landscape paintings are things that I want to explore, but then it's like, what are these pivotal things in my environment that infect me? So I
Hmm.
feel sort of like a sponge,
Hmm.
like I go to a place and everything is informed by it, and then whatever strikes me as being like, oh wow, this is terrible. Let's think about the climate and how we're understanding our place in
Right.
the world. And it seems, especially where I'm at here, it's like the most pivotal, I think, concern, right? So water, I mean, I was like obsessed with water and like air quality. So there was like an air quality report that my college put out and was telling us, like who are the greater polluters in the area. And it's just like shocking. You're like, oh my God, this is like, look at all this data that's telling us
Right.
something. We're like ignoring it. Or, I'd hear constant reports about like the delta is being impacted by desalination. I mean, all these things that are happening. Uh, and I'm like, oh, that's what I'm interested in. And I've always loved hiking and camping
Hmm.
in nature. So kind of just
You have you have all this data, and it's, all in your head, and you go into the studio and you sit down. I'm curious to know how much of the image
mm,
is worked out ahead of time versus how much does the process itself dictate and take over.
it's interesting because I think it's so fun. I give myself like I don't know if to say problems or like things that like try to stop me from doing like, so I have an image that I've kind of set out, like I've kind of planned out, okay, I'm thinking I'm going to do this thing. And then halfway through, I'm like, okay, how do I break out of this? Like, how do I move away or let the process, how do I break down the image essentially?
Is
And then
this during the process of creation?
it is during the process of
Okay.
creation. So never do I come at it like the initial impetus, like the ideation process or whatever, it always looks different,
Oh
I
yeah.
think. So
I've
it's
never met one artist who's like, I can paint exactly what I think. It always changes because there's so
no,
many good ideas that pop up during the creation time.
I mean, right? Because like you're always like thinking and reading something or looking at something or you see something on the street and you're like, holy shit, that's amazing.
Hmm. Hmm.
let me
Right.
let me bring
Got to
that
use
into
that. I
my
got to
work.
take that.
Yeah, I gotta use that. So yeah, I think I remember in grad school I had like professors come in and they're like, I never know what to expect. Like I come in one day and it looks like this, and I come in the next day and it looks like that.
That's
And it's like,
good.
how did you get from point A to point B? So yeah,
They can't read that. They can't see the evolution. Shame on them. So,
no, they can. They can.
I,
But
so
yeah.
a question I like to ask that I think sometimes stumps artists: do you consider your works to be autobiographical, or do you
Mm.
think of them as separate?
Oh, they're very autobiographical because it's like
Okay.
literally about my lens and walking around and what I'm doing. So yeah, maybe it's not like an image of me in there or like
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
that sort of stuff or like my personal effects, but it's definitely like how my body is. And I love big paintings and I love the paintings. If I could fit in a painting, that's a good painting,
That's a good sign. Well, you're using different muscles and so the
Yeah,
different
exactly.
marks. I get it. Your work, the narrative in your work seems paramount.
Hmm.
And I'm curious, even before grad school or even during, was it always that way? Was the narrative always something that's important to you?
I think yeah, I think it was always there. In a lot of ways, sometimes I'm like, oh, I kind of want to break free of that, like do I need to have like such a strong thread throughout the work? Can like the work change and do something different? And like now I'm kind of at the point where I don't know, I'm just gonna let the process go and let my ideas flow and then see what happens. I think that's the great thing about this process is both like thinking and manifesting and you're allowed to sort of change. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I it's always been there. A very strong undercurrent.
So the creative process has changed over the years. Is that Have you noticed, has that been sort of like always sliding from one into the other, or have there been breaks? Like,
I mean,
okay, I'm different.
in my mind, it feels like it slides into one another. And funny
Okay.
enough, I just feel like I literally circle back. Like I had an idea, I didn't
Uh,
really know too much about it, and then I keep going, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, that idea came back, and then I keep going, and then I'm like, oh, I went back to an earlier idea that I didn't really know what I was thinking about, and so I feel like I'm going in like these loopy circles,
little loop to loops. That's
loop to loop,
curious.
you know.
So
Um,
what do you think your audience is, or what are you hoping they walk away with?
yeah, I think what I want is like an experience and a sensation, and that maybe we can, I mean, especially right now with my current work, is that like you look at it, you feel like, wow, how do we grapple with this sort of like the ordering that we want to have in our environment, the disorder that we do see, and that maybe we can reflect on being better. Like, is there potential? I mean, I hope the paintings are both sort of depicting something terrible, but in their beauty, there's like a, I think, a pathway for reconciliation, catharsis, and,
Hmm.
positive futures. That's what I hope for.
That's what
I'm
you
getting
hope. Yeah,
I'm getting more optimistic by the day.
that's
I
good.
really I really do want there to be just new ways of thinking about stuff. You know,
That's good.
that's basically all I want from my audience. Yeah.
So, time for just two more quick questions.
Sure.
Number one, I have to ask this.
Mhm.
You go in your studio, you sit down, you're about to make something new. Do you have any studio rituals that you like to do?
Okay. Yeah, I'll make this quick, but I always walk the dog, make coffee, I play music. Lately it's been like Turkish funk, which
Uh-huh.
harkens back to my childhood for sure. And then or an audiobook. And
Okay.
okay, I gotta shout this out because I'm a big fan of fantasy and sci-fi, but like,
Okay.
okay, it's problematic a little bit, but I've been enjoying it. Wheel of Time. I'm on book like 7. It's
Okay.
it's I'm like, I'm just sucked in. I have
Is
been
that
no
for your subconscious to give it something to do while you're painting, or?
exactly. I can't, I really wanted to like, listen to academic books or like podcasts, but I just couldn't, like my
Yeah.
brain could not like, I would just have to, I couldn't paint anymore.
Right. You needed that part of your brain to paint.
Exactly. So
I get it.
that's my ritual. And oh, I forgot. I like meticulously clean my palette. I used to be like
Oh, yeah.
messy, but lately I've been finding it to be very like therapeutic. I like just like
Yeah. I met another artist who does the same thing. That's
yeah.
She destroys her studio, and then the next day cleaning the studio is part of the
Mhm.
ritual. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's like really, yeah.
time for one last question. Question I ask all artists: what does making art do for you?
Oh my God, like everything. I mean, I've been, I think of, I don't know how to, yeah, it's like everything for me, it's such a fulfillment to make this work and to reflect on myself. And it's like therapy, sort of like, you're really like thinking like, why am I thinking about these things? Why are they important? And why do I want other people to see that lens? And I think making this object, which takes a ton of time, really like, well, it also holds time. It's a marker of who I am in a
Hmm.
particular moment. So that's like a huge sense of fulfillment for me. And it gives me a lot of joy. And when I don't paint and I'm doing my job and all that, sometimes administrative tasks, I'm like, I could go back to painting and like looking at art like that.
Yeah,
It gives me a lot of joy.
that's fantastic. Perfect answer. Well,
Thank you.
Mirabel, I
Yeah.
can't thank you enough for coming by today, talking with me. I appreciate it. Fan of your work. Now I want to go back, look at it again. I
Mhm.
also want to thank everybody who tuned in to watch Art Show today. We really appreciate your support. Of course, we would love it if you like, subscribe, help push Art Show forward so we can keep doing this. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the questions section or the comment section. And if we can't answer them, we'll pass them along to Mirabel. So again, Mirabel, thank you so much for coming by today. I really
Yeah.
appreciate
Thank you so much, Craig. This is awesome.
it. Take care, everyone.